Well, hello, everyone, and welcome back to another Sunday School Review. We're going to jump into the Word of God and see what we can get from God's Word to apply to our everyday living, because the Word of God is relevant, and we can look into the Word of God and pull information out that can help us in our everyday living. And this lesson today is not going to be any different. It's talking about the faith of Ruth. All of us that's going to do anything in this life for anybody, not to mention just our immediate family, it's going to take faith. And in some cases, it's going to take taking a risk to get it done. Our lesson today is talking about the faith of Ruth. And we've heard many stories about the book of Ruth, Naomi and Orpah and Elimelech, Naomi's husband, and Chilion and um, Marlon, the two husbands that died. And so we're going to dive into that a little bit today and see what we can get to compare to our everyday living. I'm going to get my timer here because this is one of those lessons here to where if I don't keep up with my time, I'm going to go over. We might still go over. But the faith of Ruth. And coming from Ruth chapter 1, verses 6 to 18, then it goes down to verse number 22. I'm going to read a little context, kind of give us an idea of what our lesson is kind of aiming at, and then kind of go from there. The settings of the event within Ruth occurred during the time of the judges. You read this in Ruth chapter 1 and verse 1. The conquest of Canaan was completed with the Israelites tribe settled in the land. That's in Joshua 23. But the Israelites experienced oppression, not just from the inside of not getting along, not agreeing, but also from outside nations, with Moab being one of those nations. You read this in Judges chapter 3, verses 12 through 31. Now the Moabites were descended from Abraham's nephew Lot. You read about that, Genesis 19, 33 through 37. And they were banned, the Moabites, from going into the assembly of the Lord. They just didn't get together real good, didn't get along. Deuteronomy chapter 2 and verse 26 through 30, and then chapter 23, verses 3 through 6. Now, however, with that being said, marriage to the Moabites was not banned, especially the one we're going to talk about today, specifically. It was not banned. I want you to read about this in Deuteronomy chapter 7, verses 1 through 3. But despite these hostile feelings, there was a persistent famine in Israel, and it motivated Naomi's Israelite family to leave Bethlehem and go down and settle in a place called Moab, a place that they didn't get along, and it was banned from the assembly of the Lord. They had to go down there. 10 years are covered quickly in our text. And apparently beginning with the death of Naomi's husband Elimelech and the ending of the death of her sons that she had by Elimelech. You read about this in Ruth chapter 1, verse 3 and 5. In the meantime, these two sons had married Moabite women. And they are the stars of the story today. And that's Ruth and Oprah. But then when they died, they didn't have any sons or daughters. They left them childless because it was an untimely death. That brings us now to verse number 6 in Ruth chapter 1. We see the first exchange, the first kind of conversation. And we see also Naomi giving them reasons to listen to what she has to say. Verse 6 says, then she arose with her daughters-in-law that she might return from the country of Moab. For she had heard in the country of Moab how that the Lord had visited his people in giving them bread. So now I'm going to stick with the commentary. We're still using the King James International Sunday School commentary. And it's going to be somewhat of a curation of the information because there's a lot of information. But returning to her people was Naomi's best option that she had at that time as a widow. Her husband had died, and her family had back home, a home family had a legal obligation to look out for her and to care for her. And then God's renewed provision strengthened the situation down in her homeland, because things were a whole lot better there then than they were when she left. And so as she come back, it wasn't any kind of burden on the people to take care of Naomi. So it wouldn't be a hard thing. So to bring her daughters, though, on the other hand, to bring 2 Moabite women back to her homeland, but those women didn't get along in her homeland with Moabitess women, was going to be kind of unusual. So since the Moabite family community would be expected to care for her in her widowhood, she encouraged her to not hang around, not go back with her, because this was a foreign land, but go back to your homeland. And you'll see this over and over again, not less than today. In verse 7, we see more reasons that Naomi is giving them. This is really in verse 6 to 9a. She says, wherefore she went forth out of the place where she was, and her 2 daughters-in-law with her. And they went on the way to return to the land of Judah. Naomi's 2 daughters-in-law would have been expected to stay in their homeland of Moab. That a Moabite woman began this journey with their mother-in-law says something pretty deep, and that is the depth of the love and devotion they had for their mother-in-law, Naomi. So by traveling then with their mother-in-law, the young women, what they did, they put their well-being on the back burner. They put their possibilities and potential for a better family in their homeland on the back burner, and their concern was for their mother-in-law, Naomi. And they all 3 were grieving. So following Naomi could also mean that the daughters-in-law were so hurt by the loss of their husbands, Naomi's sons, that they really couldn't think real straight. And the only thing they knew to do, let's stay close with our mother-in-law. This is all the family that we have left connected to our husbands. So we're gonna follow our mother-in-law. Then the first part of verse 8, she's still giving them reasons, Naomi. And Naomi said unto her 2 daughters-in-law, go, return each to her mother's house. Y'all go back to your mama. Now, by referring to each to her mother's house, the commentary says that it might mark a subtle shift in focus from the material benefit of marriage, to the relational benefit of marriage. You read about this in Genesis chapter 24, verse 28 through 38. Or it may be what's called a silent acknowledgement of polygamy. You know what polygamy is, right? Having these 2 different families and 2 different wives and different. So the guy may have not really, the father might not have even known them that well. In this case here. So in this case, the mother's house would be a separate dwelling place, separate from the father's primary residence. Because at that time, of course, they had multiple wives and in multiple locations and so on. So however, the language that we see here suggests that Naomi was going to give up any support from her daughters-in-law. And since she was not their biological mother, they didn't have any kind of real obligation to share in the difficulty of widowhood. Let's call it widowhood wandering. So these young girls could have gone on back to their homeland and not necessarily have a guilty conscience, so to speak, because they were not under any kind of obligations. But look at it, we're gonna see commitment at a whole nother level here. Naomi is still trying to make her case in verses 8b through 9a. Look what she said. The Lord dealt kindly with you, and you have dealt as you have dealt with the dead. The Lord deal kindly with you, as you have dealt with the dead and with me. The Lord grant you that you may find rest, each of you in the house of her husband, speaking future tense, because the current husbands were dead, her sons. Then she kissed them. It's like a farewell goodbye. As Moabite widows, Ruth and Orpah, not Oprah, which is O-P, but Orpah, O-R, could be attached or seriously hurt either physically or emotionally if they went down to Israel. Let me say it again. These two women, Ruth or Orpah, could be either attacked by other women in Naomi's homeland, or seriously hurt physically or emotionally if they went back down to Israel. So Naomi gave them some words. Naomi said, "The Lord deal kindly with you," and that sounds like what the commentary calls covenant language. So then she intended to leave the women, to lead women in the hand of the Lord. In other words, I got to go on now. I got to leave y'all, but I'm gonna leave you. I'm gonna put you in the hand of the Lord. Even in the pagan land of Moab, she knew the Lord could oversee and take care of them in a pagan land. God is not limited, class, to how he can take care of someone by no means whatsoever. So from a human standpoint, Naomi's future, Naomi looked kind of dim. Because back at that time, the men almost were like retirement packages, caretakers, overseer, protectors of the women. Her man had died and her two sons had died. So, but in a farewell gesture and a clear expression of love, Naomi sealed her hopes for Ruth and Orpah. She sealed it with a kiss. Boy, this was a serious situation right here. Now we're going to change gears a little bit. We're going to see now that these girls, these daughters-in-law, now they're going to respond. 9b and through verse 10. And they lifted up their voice and wept. And he said unto her, surely we will return with thee unto thy people. Now these two girls are in agreement at this point, these two sister-in-laws. So lifting up their voice and weeping, what we see here, this was a real passionate expression of grief and sorrow. And in this context, it could be because these two, or these three, really all of them, were widows, and they had very uncertain futures. They really didn't know what tomorrow would hold, or the pain that they felt as they thought about leaving their mother-in-law to fend for herself. They didn't know what to do. So surely now we will return with thee unto thy people. What that means, that indicates that they had great devotion for Naomi, great respect for their mother-in-law, great love and concern for her as well. And their response might at this point might not have been a well thought out plan, because it was under so much grief. They just kind of moved without thinking. Could have been they just simply loved their mother-in-law. But but what we see here, this is a very emotional appeal of both of these two girls. And they did not want to leave their mother-in-law. They didn't want to see the mother-in-law leave either. Man, this is some kind of story. Now we go down to verse 11 and we see the mother pleads. Naomi is going to start her making her case again. Naomi said, turn again, my daughters. Why will ye go with me? Are there any more sons in my womb, that they may be your husbands? Wow. So we see here that Naomi emphasized the reality of the situation. This don't look too good, girls. Ain't got nothing to give you. Ain't gonna have no more kids. So personally, her childbearing years were all over. And even if the Lord gave her grace and she got pregnant again and had kids again, are they gonna wait, I don't know, 20 years or so before they could, to these babies, become marriage-ready men? Probably not. So in the law of Moses, the brother of the widow, that deceased husband, that brother of the widow's, well, let's say the guy that died, his brother, was required to marry the widow. They call that a levirate marriage. Some call it levirate marriage. That's in Deuteronomy chapter 25 and 5 through 10. So what happens when that brother would come in when his brother died, marry his sister-in-law, and then go in unto her, as the Bible says it, and raise up sons. She get pregnant, and there's a son is born to keep that lineage going. That was the law. If he decided he didn't want to do it, and they took a shoe off, and it's all kind of thing. They took the shoe off, and I don't have the exact either. Put the shoe out there in front of the people, and they saw that this guy took his shoe off, and because he did not want to marry his brother's wife, and this was an indication or an announcement or an advertisement that this is what this guy did, which was really disrespectful of that time and that day. So what that would do is it would care for that widow, the brother would, and as I mentioned, raise up a child in his stead. Now, in verse 12 and 13, we see Naomi is still making her case. Look what she said. She said, "Turn again, my daughters, go your way. I am too old to have a husband. If I should say I have hope, or if I should have a husband also tonight, and should also bear sons, would ye tarry for them till they were grown? Would you stay for them from having husbands until they grew up and became men?" She gave a real hypothetical situation here. These hypothetical sons wouldn't be ready to marry until it was in their early 20s. She ain't even pregnant. She ain't even married again, and ain't gonna. This is a real hypothetical situation that she's given to Orpah and Ruth. Likely putting Ruth and Orpah somewhere around in their 40s. So here it is, let's say some girls in their 20s, gonna wait until hopefully you get pregnant. Hope you have two boys, hopefully back to back, and we're gonna wait 20, 21 years. She said, y'all ain't gonna do that. And then back at that time, even now, pregnancy beyond 35 can be somewhat dangerous. So remarriage in Moab was the best option for these two young women, and this is a case that Naomi is trying to make. Y'all got a whole lot better chance of finding a husband among your people, the Moabites, than you do going to Israel, finding anybody down there that's going to even consider marrying you. So that was the situation. So the Moab families were invested in their well-being, and they could, look at this, they could arrange marriage contracts for Ruth and also for Orpah. But Naomi's own care would be more easily obtained if she did not come back to Israel with two Moabite women. That was dependent upon her. That was going to make the situation a whole lot worse and a whole lot dire situation there. You read about this, and I want you to read Ruth chapter 4, verses 1 through 6. Now, the mama, Naomi, is still pleading. Look at verse 13b. "Nay, my daughters, for it grieved me much, not for my sake, for your sakes, that the hand of the Lord is gone out against me." That's what she's saying now. Boy, I tell you, when under that kind of pressure, you can make a lot of assumptions, even including the Lord. The hand of the Lord is going out against me illustrates Naomi's feelings that God had not so much abandoned her, but that he was judging her. That's kind of the language or the interpretation of this verse. But we learn from reading the book of Job, in Job chapter 42 and verse 1 through 6, that ascribing or attributing life's situation as punishment from the Lord is very unwise. However, in the middle of this kind of grief and pain and loss, one way of finding what the commentary calls legitimate or either illegitimate meaning is to find God's judgment in the pain. And folks said, God must be getting him. God must be getting her. Oh, what they done did wrong. This is, we got to be careful on doing that, class, and saying the Lord getting him. This is not always the case. The word of the Lord will help us in our assuming, our assumptions, and it would help us in our conclusions about hard things and hard times that happen and has happened in all of our lives. If you've been living for any period of time, you've suffered loss, you've suffered pain, we've lost loved ones, we've lost jobs, we've lost different kind of things, we've been stolen from, lied on, all kind of things have happened in life. But I want to read something to you real quick. I want to read Isaiah chapter 55 and verse number 9, and I'm going to read this in the New Living Translation. It says, "For just as the heavens are higher than the earth, so my ways are higher than your ways, and my thoughts higher than your thoughts." Now I'm going to read what Romans chapter 8, verses 28 through 35 says. Romans 8, 28 through 35 in the New Living Translation. "And we know that God causes everything to work together for the good of those who love God and are called according to his purpose for them. For God knew his people in advance, and he chose them to become like his son, so that his son would be the firstborn among many brothers and sisters. And having chosen them, he called them to come to him. And having called them, he gave them the right standing with himself. And having given them right standing, he gave them his glory." Verse 31, "What shall we say? What shall we say about such wonderful things as these? If God is for us, who can ever be against us? Since he did not spare his own son, but gave him up for us all, won't he also give us everything else? Who dares accuse us whom God has chosen for his own? No one. For God himself has given us right standing with himself. Who then will condemn us? No one. For Christ Jesus died for us and was raised to life for us, and he is sitting in the place of honor at God's right hand, pleading for us. Can anything else separate us from Christ's love? Does it mean he no longer loves us if we have trouble or calamity, or are persecuted or hungry or destitute or in danger or threatened with death?" I don't know why bad things happen to good people. I don't know how often it seems like more good things happen to bad people. David said, "My foot almost slipped." Why, David? "When I saw the prosperity of the wicked." But see, it's important to know that now that our ways are not his ways and our thoughts are not his thoughts. They are higher from one another as the heaven is from the earth. God is a whole lot smarter than all of us. So now we see the daughters diverge in verse number 14. This is number 2, the second exchange here that we still see here, and the daughters are going to separate, kind of diverge. "And they lifted up their voice and wept again. And Orpah kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth clave unto her." In the beginning, Orpah and Ruth responded in a unified lament, unified emotional plea. Don't make us go, don't you leave, let's not separate. They were all together. Following, and this is following Naomi's goodbye kiss. Y'all go on back home. But then Orpah kissed Naomi. And this was a real goodbye kiss, a goodbye greeting from her daughter-in-law. Well, I guess I'm gonna take your advice. And so the text does not indicate that this decision by Orpah was a bad, poor decision, or in poor taste, or that she was unfaithful. Not at all. What she did, she acted in keeping with the wisdom of her time. She acted also in keeping with Naomi's greatest hope for her, to have a nice future, to have another husband, to have kids, and to thrive. And we don't know what God was going to do because of how faithful they were, even in this heathen land. Ruth would, on the other hand, she clave unto her. and Ruth would not be moved. Nothing her mother-in-law could say could cause her to change her mind. Her heart was fixed, and her mind was made up, and she was not going to leave. So we see now in verse 15, Naomi is going to give them a final plea. This is like the third exchange. Okay, this is it. This is it right here. And she said, behold, verse 15, behold, thy daughters and thy daughter, thy sister-in-law is gone back unto her people and unto her gods. Return thou after thy sister-in-law. You see, the principal deity that was worshipped in Moab was what the commentary calls the detestable Chemos. You read about this in Numbers chapter 21 and 29, 1 Kings 11 and 7, 1 Kings 11 and 33. And the Israelites were meant to be distinct from their neighbors. Why? Because they had to reject all other gods but the Lord. And they knew it was only one true and living God. They knew that, and they had to embrace that. And never worshiping a group of deities. Don't ever it had so many gods back at that time, a god for this, a god of the sun, a god of the moon, all kind of deities, false gods at that time. I want you to read Exodus chapter 20, verses 1 through 6. The Lord made it clear. Don't put no other god, no graven image before him. So Ruth made a choice between what she had known before and what she had come to know in her husband's household. Her husband came from Israel. This was Ruth and Elimelech's son. And so they knew the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So Ruth had learned about this, marrying her husband, Naomi's son. And so that's what she had learned and leaving from a pagan society. In verse 16 and 17, we see Ruth made a promise. Boy, it's getting pretty thick now. And Ruth said, entreat me not. This is Ruth, the daughter-in-law. Entreat me not to leave thee or to return from following after thee. For whether thou goest, I will go. And whether thou lodgest, I will lodge. Thy people shall be my people. Thy God, my God. Where thou diest, will I die. And there will I be buried. Man, this is a big deal right here, y'all. Big deal. Okay. We see here an introductory statement by Ruth, and what the commentary calls an emphatic statement. I said what I meant, and I meant what I said. I am immovable. I have an immovable will to follow you, Naomi. And that's strengthened by Ruth making a listing of her commitments to Naomi. That word commitment is a real soft word nowadays. And the commitment to go and to lodge with her mother-in-law. That tied the future of Ruth with the future to Naomi, because she was committed to go wherever she went. Whatever provisions Naomi was going to find among her people, whatever she was going to eat, wherever she was going to stay, however meager those arrangements may have been, those findings may have been, however little or much, Ruth was going to settle herself and be satisfied with being with her mother-in-law. Boy, this young lady right here you talking about a mother-in-law and daughter-in-law relationship. This was definitely one right here. So Naomi then would expect, being the older person, to die before her daughter-in-law Ruth. But Ruth's commitment was to die in Judah, in Naomi's homeland, and be buried down there in Judah. So in these ways, Ruth declared Naomi to be her mother, almost like a biological mother. And she was just her mother-in-law, as outlined the devotion that she would demonstrate to her as a child. Now we see here, Ruth made a promise. Look what Ruth said in verse 17b and verse 18. The Lord do so to me, and more so also, if aught but death part thee and me. When she saw that she was steadfastly minded to go with her, then she left speaking unto her. Now this was a little bit different from Orpah. Ruth gave what the commentary calls a spontaneous declaration. And I'm not leaving. And the commentary calls these solemn words. Ruth was very careful. Ruth considered the cost. She carefully considered the cost of going with Naomi. And so when Naomi realized this girl here ain't going to change her mind, she quit trying to convince her. So we see now in verse 22 the outcome. So Naomi returned, and Ruth the Moabitess, her daughter-in-law, with her, which returned out of the country of Moab, and they came to Bethlehem in the beginning of the barley harvest. So Bethlehem, then, that word Bethlehem is literally translated house of bread. This is kind of ironic because they had just came out of the house of bread had come out of a very bad famine in the land. So this drought was likely caused by the famine, because the rain cloud would sometime pass right over Bethlehem and climb up to higher elevations, such as Moab. Now, hey, we ain't got time to break that down, right? Before bursting. So the mention of the two words barley harvest indicated that better days had come to Judah, Israel. Things were a whole lot better than they were when they left 10 years ago. So the beginning of that harvest took place sometime between mid-March and mid-April. And in later Jewish traditions, the book of Ruth became so powerful, okay, it's so popular. It was read at the Feast of Weeks in celebration of God's provision of the harvest. I'm going to end it right there, class. And I can sum this thing up by saying a few words. He might not come when you want him to come, but he's always on time. I guess that's 16 words, 17 words. He might not come when you want him, but he's always on time. Keep the faith, hold on. Let's sometimes go back and look at the faith of Ruth, and it gives us great consolation that God will never leave us and never abandon us. Even when it doesn't look that way, hang on in there. Hey, y'all have a great rest of the week. Look forward to seeing you again next week on our next Sunday School Review. Take care.